Hello and welcome to Dramatic Pause. I'm Katie Wellman.
And I'm Lauren Blakeway.
In this podcast, we hope to tackle subjects that other art podcasts don't cover.
This isn't a podcast about promotions or reviews, although we do allow artists to plug their next work. Today's episode looks at the positives and the pitfalls of taking your show to the Edinburgh Fringe Festival. Today, we're joined with two production companies that are taking shows to the Edinburgh Fringe. Would you like to introduce yourselves?
Yeah, of course. Hello. My name's Grace. I'm the co-artistic director of a Liverpool-based company called Ugly Bucket. And within Ugly Bucket, I wear many hats as a director, a performer, and a pretty unwilling producer.
My name's Finn Donnelly. This is my first full production, which is going to be God, the Devil and Me. A bit like you, I wear many hats unwillingly. So producer, writer, director, and cast member of the current production. Yeah.
Fab, so where did the idea come from to take it to Fringe? Did it, for yourself, was it?
I was part of a Fringe production around 4 years ago that built up to going to Edinburgh and never quite got there because of 2020 COVID.
Right.
And it was something I knew I wanted to do. I wasn't confident that this was the script I wanted to do it with. I had a sort of complex about it has to be the right script. It has to be the one I'm ready to do. And then essentially we got in a couple of the current cast members who were really just coming into R&D with me and see what we could develop. Yeah. And in that process, it felt like the right group of people and the right project to take. I think if we hadn't done the R&D, I probably would have I would have built it up too much and never gone for it. But because I saw it playing out and the company getting on really well, and it seemed like a really good point in time for all of us, it just kind of came together for us really in that sense.
Okay, and for Ugly Bucket, what was your journey?
Yeah, so the show we're taking to the Edinburgh Fringe this year is called Stuffed, and it's our latest show, which is about food banks in the UK. I suppose my relationship with Edinburgh Fringe is quite unique, that before we ever took anything to Edinburgh as a company, I'd worked at the Edinburgh Fringe, I think for like 6 or 7 years. I was a volunteer. I think when I was like 18, I started volunteering and I built my way up to be a venue manager for one of the venues in Edinburgh called Greenside Venues. And so I kind of knew Edinburgh quite well as an employee. And I think as well, I would recommend anybody like wanting to go and see the festival, actually working it is one of the best ways to go and see it, to stay for the month, to get to know shows really well. Sometimes going up for a few days, you might not catch those hidden gems or those things that people are talking about. But yeah, so I'd worked a lot. So then I very much thought that I would then know as a performer, as a company, what to expect. And we took, in 2019, we took 2 shows to Greenside Venues. We did 2 and we basically alternated days. We took Boast Junior Blues and 2 Clowns One Cup, which were our first 2 shows. And like I'm saying, thinking I knew what that experience would be like, and found the experience of going as a performer just completely opposite to what it was like working there, especially in the sense that when I worked at the Edinburgh Fringe, you know, arriving and seeing that Edinburgh Fringe programme and it's so thick and full of shows, and I go, wow, there's so many shows, this is so exciting. And then as a company, I was going, oh my God, there's so many shows. How are we possibly going to stand out, or how are we going to get bums and seats? And yeah, I found the performer experience, but not less enjoyable, but much more real strain and much more stressful, and the pressure was really tough. But we had a really successful Ed Fringe run in 2019. Had plans to go back in 2020, which again we were also, which was cut short for us. But our next Edinburgh Fringe experience, which we took, our show Good Grief, that was a completely different Edinburgh Fringe experience because we were lucky enough to be one of the recipients of the Untapped Award, which is an award that is from New Diorama and Underbelly as like a joint award, and it's pretty much Edinburgh Fringe on a platter. Right. So then when we took Good Grief, we just didn't have that financial worry. We had so much support. Just being part of the Untapped cohort did a lot for us. We had press support, marketing support, and financial support.
Yeah.
So we were very aware, I think, when we were at Fringe, that next time, that this is not Fringe. Do you know what I mean? We were very much like, this is not how Fringe is, and we were aware of how lucky we were and fortunate. So I guess, like, going back this year, we're going back to Fringe, knowing it as it was, where we're back flyering, we're in a bigger space. The space is double the size that we had for Good Grief, so we're definitely starting to feel that pressure a little bit more in ticket sales. And like I was saying earlier about we don't have that kind of big financial input, so we're more reliant on our ticket sales this year as well. But that's our journey, and so I've done a lot of Fringe. And I feel like every time I say never again, and here we are once again.
It's the adrenaline rush that must push you through as well, with the excitement of being able to take a show and see what happens.
It is very exciting, and I think it's similar to you were saying. I think when we took Good Grief and we left, I felt like, because it's such a big risk and it is so intense and stressful, that I didn't think we'd go back. But then you make the show and you go, okay, I feel you have the team, you have the show, and you feel that you want people to see this. And there is something about Stuffed that really excites me, being in Edinburgh. I guess that feeling, Edinburgh Fringe being kind of almost feels quite elitist, and there's something about bringing this show to kind of, I don't know, shake things up, or feel like it can, if things don't trickle down from the top, they must erupt from the bottom. So there's something about it that really excited me about bringing a show like this to Edinburgh audiences.
I think you've touched on something really important there, because obviously both of the shows are raising money for causes that are really dear to your hearts. They're obviously very important as well. They're not just shows, there's so much more around them, what's happening around the shows, all the research, what you've done with the community. Can you talk to me a little bit about that, each of you, and tell me, like, first of all, how did the idea start? How did it become so close to your heart? And where have you taken it?
So for us at Ugly Bucket, the inspiration for Stuffed, I think, came, it was in lockdown, and I think we'd been on this big roller coaster of the company kind of growing, and then suddenly having to stop in lockdown and kind of look at what was around us. And in that lockdown period, we had members of the company who were volunteering at food banks, and we had members of the company that were working for the Wirral helpline emergency services for emergency food parcels. I'm really inspired as well by the food bank that Slunglow were running in Leeds. And there was lots of things that just felt like we felt like the next thing we wanted to make was to make a show about food banks. However, so then what we do with Ugly Bucket is, whenever we choose a topic that we want to make a show about, we'll go and we create relationships within communities. So we created relationships with a number of food banks around the country, and working with them, recorded personal testimony and interviews from kind of food bank frontliners. And then those interviews, we take them and they become the kind of verbatim foundation of our shows, which are a kind of mashup of clowning and physicality and original music. So that's kind of what Ugly Bucket do, or what we've done so far. What was interesting about that is we think, let's make a show about food banks. And in our copy for the show, we say, this is a show about food banks. This is not a show about food. And I think that was a big thing, a big realization for us when we went and started to interview and kind of dug deeper into this research, how it was just a complete web. And you think that you're making a show about food banks, then you go, okay, well, actually, if you're making a show about food banks, you're making a show about poverty. And if you're making a show about poverty, you're making a show about everything and everyone, and our systems and our social systems. And it was a lot, I think, realising the scale of it. and the scale of the crisis was a lot as well, which definitely feeds into how the show feels to watch, I think. But yeah, that's our process. Yeah, and that was a few years ago, and things are only worse now, so it's interesting bringing it back now.
Wow, I mean, I don't think ours is quite as well researched in a way. As in, when I was a teenager, I suffered a psychotic episode, which, although God, the Devil and Me doesn't directly promote that that's what the show is about, that is, its fundamental core is about understanding why people with psychosis could like their delusions or hallucinations, or why people with psychosis struggle to accept that they have an illness. Mm-hmm. It's something that they really sort of do fundamentally believe. And it kind of came about because I'm from a really, really small town in Wiltshire. There's next to nothing there. Poverty, as you say, hidden poverty in Wiltshire is a real thing. And opportunities for young people are really quite minimal. And at 19, after I'd recovered from a psychotic episode, I got a place at Lambda, and I went and I did some time there and didn't complete it. But the thing was then, of course, I didn't want to come home because of how Wiltshire is. Pursued staying in London for about 6 to 9 months after I left Lambda, working in a theatre, which was great. I loved being an usher. It's really good fun. I'd recommend it. But lockdown came. That shut everything down. And what I'd been building up for was a tour with the Fringe Theatre Company I was part of. And everything shut down. And I just sort of got stuck in Wiltshire again. And something that was interesting was, of course, when I lived in London, people didn't necessarily know I had a diagnosis of schizoaffective disorder. They wouldn't have done. I didn't talk about it that much, and I didn't present with it that much. But people in Wiltshire remembered me from school, having had the breakdown, having gone to a psychiatric unit, were very curious about what exactly that had been and how it had come about. And I found myself in constant conversations explaining that people with psychosis don't just walk around the street naked with a knife and yell, that they're people, that they can be funny, they can be smart, they can have ideas, they can be creative, they can contribute to society. And that was just a fundamental misunderstanding from where I came from, that people had, was that people with that illness are just deranged, essentially, was their idea. I mean, that's not a technically nice term to use, but that was their assumption of it, I guess, was, you're not standing here screaming at me, obscenities, you can't have psychosis. And also very weirdly obsessed with the idea that psychosis only presents in males, that only men can be schizophrenic, and that's about them being angry as well. And so all of that combined, kind of, I was living with a housemate at the time that had always wanted to be an actor, and he'd never had the opportunity. School had told him not to do it. School had said, you won't get anything out of it, don't try. And he worked in a bar, and he said, you're a writer, do you have anything going? And I was like, as it happens, I've come up with something. And our basic principle was how to make psychosis accessible, because when you give it the label it has, and you give it the components it has, delusions, hallucinations, disorganized speech, disorganized thinking, when you give it those massive strap lines, it's quite hard to digest, I think, as a concept of what it must be like to experience it. But I think, as someone who has lived with it, I can say it is the same as any experience, in that when you're going through it, you feel it and believe it as authentically as if it was something you knew really well, And so it's trying to break down that thing of someone saying, I believe God and the devil talk to me, and I believe they tell me to save the world. It's breaking that down into, how do people get there, and how can all of us fall into that sometimes on a more relatable level. So something we really wanted to do with God and the devil, for example, was make them fun and make them like playful, and make them people you would kind of want to hang out with. And so for us, the process was less about how can we prove people wrong on psychosis, and much more about how can our show feel like a psychotic episode, in the sense that the audience is going to have to reconcile misunderstanding the plot initially. So the idea is that for the first act, they believe Gabe's an angel. And in the second act, it transpires it's a psychotic episode. How do you connect that for yourself? How do you make that work for yourself?
Yeah. I think going off what you were saying, I guess the thing that kind of links these shows together is trying to eradicate us and them. And like you're saying about trying to get the audience to understand a perspective and to experience something is very similar to Stuffed, in the way that we are trying to help people understand that everybody's at risk, and that these situations could be anybody.
And I think it leaves room for play with the audience, in the sense of, with our social media, we've created kind of a whole other world where God and the devil have little conversations in our kitchen part-time, and you tune in and you see what they're talking about this week, or what are they like when they babysit a baby. And it's what's also nice is creating the idea, like in our show, when the show ends, God, the devil and Gabe all remain in character. So when the show ends, you can go and have a conversation with them. You can ask them, what was it like with this? You might get some silly questions that get silly answers, or you might actually have a really in-depth, profound understanding of something. And with regards to kind of in community work, it's stuff like putting the main cast in their costumes and taking them to the streets and seeing what happens when people meet God and the devil, and what do they think. It has its risks, but it pays off in the long run. And also, where we come from in Wiltshire, it was about bringing young people on board that wanted to do it, bringing young people on board that wouldn't have the opportunity otherwise, and also then going into like community centres and saying, we'll do a completely free talk on mental health in theatre for an hour, and they can come completely free of charge, workshop with us, play around with what they want, use the characters of God and the devil to build their own stuff if they want. That was brilliant. Something we really enjoyed doing, and it was really good fun.
With both shows as well, they're really about the community, as you're both saying, and about like making a difference. And with Fringe as well, everyone goes to theatre for different reasons. So how do you feel that's affected like the companies and sales, or do you think it's kind of impacted people to come to the shows in terms of to learn and to develop in terms of as an audience?
I'd say that there's definitely been a huge spike in issue-based theatre in general, and I think you absolutely see that at the Fringe a lot. I think in recent years there's a lot of anger and frustration, and people feel that they have things to say, and that our art spaces are really powerful places to do that. So yeah, I think absolutely there's been what was quite interesting was I was at the Adelaide Fringe in Australia this year, which is the second biggest fringe festival outside of Edinburgh, and so different in the way that Adelaide Fringe very much more cabaret, stand-up comedy, not as much theatre, and definitely not as much issue-based theatre, and I think that was what I found quite interesting coming back to the UK, and people who make art here really want to scream and shout about what matters to them, which I think is really interesting. And I think that is drawing people in, people knowing that these places are where we can have action into things we want to change in the world. But on the flip side of that, I do think you get audiences, some people that might be feeling a bit sick and tired of feeling like they're being maybe lectured to. Or I suppose one of the issues is that it is amazing that we're making so much, I know, like politically charged, socially charged work, but you do have to question when you're screaming into an echo chamber, and you might be preaching to the, I can't think what the phrase is, preaching to the church. Someone will write a comment, preaching to that are our theatre. How are we if you want to change something in the world, how are you bringing people into those? A lot of people in those theatre spaces might already agree with what you have to say. So how do we change minds of people? And how do we bring non-theatre goers to come and experience your work? I think that's probably the biggest challenge at the moment with so much great social work.
Yeah, I mean, the theatre production I was a part of before was called 10 Days to Shook the World, and it was about the Russian Revolution. So highly politically charged. And Jane Morris, who produced that work, who is a really good friend of mine and I really admire, something I admired of her was her kind of ability to say, we don't want people in the audience to just be in the audience. We want people in the audience who want to engage with us and what we're saying. They don't have to agree with us. That's not the point. But they have to want to be open to what we're going to do. And then when it's all over, if they disagree, that's still something they can take away. And they know that they sat there and they sat with it and they gave it a chance and it just didn't work for them. It just wasn't something they were on board with. And that's okay. And I think something that I think with politically charged work is it's really important to still be creative and to still be fun.
Yeah.
I think where some theatre has fallen down in the past, although I never like to criticise it because everything has its own validity in its own way. But I think it's when the idea is, I've done this, I've put this on, so you just have to sit with whatever this is. I think theatre can absolutely be uncomfortable. I think that should 100% be something we have to live with, of like addressing something that that like is uncomfortable to watch or is uncomfortable to be a part of. But I think it's like making it so that an audience feels part of it, part of a community, part of what you're trying to do. I think if you isolate the audience too much into this space of, as you kind of said about lecturing, I think it can sit with them as like, so I don't have a part to play in this. There's no hope for what I can do in this.
Yes. And I think going off that, I feel like there's a misunderstanding that community work or applied theatre can't be actually really exciting pieces of theatre alone. I think everybody's had experiences where you'll go and see a really amazing, maybe a community production or like a piece of applied theatre, and whilst you love the message, you'll come out and go, and I thought the message was amazing, but theatrically it maybe isn't that exciting, or
it wasn't imaginative.
Or
sometimes
imaginative,
I find is you know. Yeah.
And I feel like that with Ugly Bucket, that's what we were always really striving to do, is that actually you could take out the, our message and your learning, and still it's a high quality piece of drama. It's spine tingling, it's electric, it's high production value, I think, as well. Like with Stuffed, this year we're adding things like pyrotechnics and live flame, and it's just, I mean, I never thought setting up a clown company that we would ever be using pyrotechnics, but I think it's amazing that I'm like, this message deserves that level of production that you would see in big theatres and things. I was like, we should be pumping money into these messages.
And plus I think that's the fun of Fringe sometimes, is I think sometimes where it falls down is, unfortunately, for some theatre companies' budget, and that's really that's really terrible. Like I think if it's a good idea, if it's a solid idea, the fact that money is what can bring it down is really disappointing, just as a concept. But additionally, I think like some of the best shows I've ever been a part of, at Lambda, it wasn't infinite budget, but when productions would be put on, they had a solid budget for what they were doing. Some of the best productions I've ever been a part of have been because they didn't have money, and so they thought outside the box and went, okay, we can't have a confetti cannon on stage. What can we do to mimic the same idea? And so I think it's a real fine line with it as well, where money, you can't ignore that money impacts it, but simultaneously being
isn't
creative,
everything.
being creative with a limited budget is important.
Yes.
Can you talk a little bit about how you've reached your budget? What are the type of things that you guys have been doing to actually get to the Edinburgh Fringe?
So with our Edinburgh Fringe run this year, basically everything relies on our ticket sales. We're at the Pleasance Courtyard in Pleasance Above, and the way that Pleasance does its deals is it's like a ticket split. So yeah, our budget and estimations are all based on everything is based on our ticket sales. As a company, because we're about 6 years old now as a company, we have more of a cash flow. So there's things that we can do where we have money aside that we can use to get us to the Fringe and to pay for the things we need, and then when the ticket sales come through, then we can kind of it goes back into that cash flow. However, we as a company as well are doing a development this summer for Stuffed, which we just got Arts Council funding for.
Oh, brilliant.
But it's a strange type of grey area because Arts Council England don't fund anything that goes to Edinburgh Fringe because it's not technically England. So the way that this kind of works, and it's a big help for us, not in getting the show to Edinburgh, but in making sure that version of the show that goes to Edinburgh is the best version of it. It is basically like that Arts Council money, none of that touches Edinburgh, if that makes sense. So we have a project in the summer where the Arts Council money pays for us to develop the show. It's helping us put on our show in the Unity and Shakespeare North, and it's helping us do our wraparound activity. But then that project pretty much ends before Fringe starts, if that makes sense. So that's kind of how we're I guess developing the show to be ready, but we were very much prepared if we weren't we were in a funny position where we had to confirm our Edinburgh Fringe slot before knowing if we were going to have our Arts Council bid to develop it. So we kind of made a very conscious decision that if we weren't going to get the Arts Council money, that we were still going to Edinburgh. It was just that we would have probably had to go down some different avenues of deciding just how much we can develop it. The Arts Council money has really helped us develop things in terms of access, incorporating audio description into the show, making sure that the shows are all captioned, incorporating BSL into the physicality. So there's lots of things that we've done for access. But yeah, if we hadn't got that Arts Council bid, it would have been looking much more difficult. But not impossible. We were still taking the show. It just would have been it would have been a rehearsed version of Stuffed, because we have done it before. It would have been a rehearsed version of that show rather than a developed version that's going to Edinburgh, if that makes sense. So that's kind of how I guess we also have our clowning retreat that we do at Bidston Observatory every year. And that again for us is kind of just that kind of supports us as a company with a bit of income to keep the lights on in the office and to keep people paid for their admin time and things like that. So we as a company as 6 years old, we're only just coming to a place where we're starting to figure out how the company sustains itself, and we're still not quite there. We still live very precariously project to project. So that's kind of us.
Well, we're a bit of a ragtag team on my end. It's just people kind of cobbled together, which I imagine is not unusual for a first-time Fringe. No. The thing we've really had to be doing is learning as we go, in the sense that the previous production I've talked about, 10 Days at Shook the World, that did a tour of the UK, but it didn't go to Edinburgh. And so I kind of knew from the outset that Jane had done that tour because it helps kind of create momentum, and it also helps build finances in terms of, where we're, for example, in Bath, we want to make it pretty community focused because this is where we're from. We just booked a community centre and we're just performing it in the hall of the community centre, and tickets are only £3. But where booking the hall was only 10 quid, like 20 quid a day, we only need and it's a 60-70 capacity. We only need like a couple of members of the audience in and we broke even. So it was getting kind of clever, I guess, with how we actually build up to Edinburgh as opposed to just focusing on getting to Edinburgh. We're at the Space UK, which actually has a policy of payment up front. We did a load of crowdfunding and we also had, I've worked in the industry a little bit in terms of like knowing producers, so we had some small backing. Like we don't like it to be like, can you give us £2,000 to pay for this? It's far more like, could you possibly stretch to 200 quid and you'll get your logo on our poster, or can you do this or that? But again, trying to be creative in terms of how we get there, what we do. In terms of how we came to our budget, it was how it came, in the sense that we were learning as we went. There was a rush for venues. Obviously, there always is with Edinburgh. And so kind of in the middle of we'd pre-prepared what we thought we were going to do. And then at the last minute, we couldn't do what we thought we were going to do. So then it was relearning everything we thought we'd decided. So it's been slapdash, and I'll admit that. But I kind of like that. I like the kind of jankiness of it. I think if you can pull it off and make some mistakes along the way, it's probably better for learning what you're going to do in the future than if it just smoothly sailed there this year and then next year it all changed. So on that end, we've been learning as we go, essentially. But it's been good fun.
Our first Edinburgh Fringe that we did was similar to yours, where we'd done a tour prior, and that had helped us build up funds, and then we did a crowdfunder, and that was the pot that got us to Edinburgh, and then ticket sales. Everything depends. And we did a sellout run in Edinburgh the first year we did, and I think we broke even. I'm
not expecting to break even. I'm just be happy to go.
Exactly. It's really knowing, managing your expectations and knowing realistically that often there's not really money to be made in it.
Yeah. And so when you've got that venue and you've picked a venue you go to and it gets confirmed, how is that? What is the process from there? So you know that you go and you've got your date. Is it flyers when you get to Edinburgh, or do you kind of just chill? Like how's the feeling and all the process?
It depends on the venue, I think, a lot, doesn't it? In terms of what they require for you with press releases and different bits.
And I think also press releases, and it depends on your team. And if you've got if you've got like someone who is doing your tech and someone who's doing your press and someone who, then that's great and you're really lucky. But I think the reality is for a lot of people is that, like we've said, they're wearing many hats. So you are the marketing manager, but you're also the press officer, and you might also be directing and performing. So I think that run up can feel really stressful. I remember the first year we did it, and it was a lot of like printing of flyers, printing of posters, getting your tech information sorted, and making sure that your show is just ready, like rehearsing, organising. I remember we were organising a lot of venues do scratch nights and things that you can sign up for. I'd really recommend doing that. I think it's a blur. It's a blur. It's stressful.
I can relate to the many hats, and I think it's like, for me, the thing is Edinburgh is not the only venue I'm having to organise or thing I'm having to organise. And so to a degree where Edinburgh is currently in August, if it comes into my inbox, I'll look at it. And if it doesn't need dealing with immediately, I'm looking at other things prior to that, to be honest.
You have to sort your travel, your accommodation, where you're organising how you're actually going to get there.
God bless mum and dad.
Obviously, and beg, borrowing, and stealing, and asking as many favours as you can. And then
For us, we also have an added sort of element, which is that 2 members of our cast are 17, so they are minors.
Oh well, that is
So we have to put all kinds of safeguarding procedures in. We have to get people DBS checked and have chaperoning, and it's for me that is far a minor's safety is far more important to me than whether we got our posters done on exactly the right date for something. So it again, we've been learning as we go of how to prioritize, in the sense that, for me, I could have said, we'll do we'll do all the safeguarding like at the end of our prep. But I thought, for me, it was like, no, that has to be the first thing we do if we know we're taking two 17-year-olds.
Yeah.
They have to be safeguarded from whenever they're part of the company. So that's just that. But then, you know, so then when things fly into my inbox about, have you got your posters done? Of course, I'm getting them done. And, you know, that's all been done ourselves as well, because we don't really want to pay out
we
to
do everything in-house, marketing-wise.
Yeah, especially where it can be nice when it's like pieced together in a bit of a kind of like very hands-on way, in a way.
You might be doing work contacting reviewers, trying to contact people that you want to come and see the show. In terms of flyering, when you get there, you can, I suppose it depends a lot. I find that a lot of people book tickets very early these days. I think some people, when they're going to Edinburgh, they know they're going and they'll go and book
I think that's
straight away.
A lot of people who do every year.
Yeah,
they'll look at what they want ahead of time.
they plan. But I guess, I think my biggest piece of advice, if say you had like not many audience in for your first couple of shows, I would just go out and give out as many free tickets as you can to just get people in. Because word of mouth really is your strongest thing that you can have. Beyond flyering, beyond anything like that, getting people to just talk to each other is the best thing. So I think if you had no people in for the first few shows, just get as many bums and seats for free as you can, and then hope that it starts a little ripple effect of just people talking about your show. Kind
of a sense of like, don't be too proud on it, just kind of get people in.
Yes, yeah. Oh well, leave pride.
Yeah.
If you can take a show to Fringe, you can leave pride.
I don't think I ever had any, so I think we're good. It's also like, it's just a lot. It's like in different bits at different times for different venues, what they'll require or what you'll feel is right to do, or when that is kind of more my I might be wrong because I'm doing it for the first time, but for me that's been more intuitive, and then, you know, whatever happens.
That being said, venues are very good at venues are very aware that for a lot of people come to Edinburgh, it's the first time that they're doing it. So we've been to Greenside, we've been to Underbelly, we've been to Pleasance, and I think it's across the board that all venues are very, very good with like their packs and information and giving you the information that you need, and I think don't feel that if you're like, I'm going to take a show to Edinburgh, that you're going to have to know everything, and you will find out. I'd
also say on what we experienced with booking a venue was that a lot of them are really honest in terms of like, if they don't think that they have a space that would be good for your show, a fair number of them will say that. They really just want good theatre at the Fringe, a lot of them. It's hit or miss, but it is like, the ones that we had great experiences with were Pleasance, Greenside and The Space. And they were just very upfront on, oh, we'd love to have your show. What would you actually want, though? Because we don't want you to book a space that isn't the space you want.
A lot of venues, when you're signing up, will make you pick your top three, like what your top three spaces. And also there's a difference in Edinburgh where you have programmed venues, and you have, I think it's called open program venues. So, for example, Pleasance is like a programmed venue where they kind of select the shows that they're going to have, whereas somewhere like Greenside is open program, and they're very much like, if you want a space and you want to pay for a space, then it's yours, basically. And there's something I really like about the Greenside model in the way that they're very much trying to open it up to everybody. And it's less, whereas like other venues, it might feel more selective.
And so obviously for Ugly Bucket, this is like is it the third time now?
Third time taking a show.
So what like advice would you give like the listeners, and for yourself, what advice would you give for do's and don'ts?
So my top advice would be that if you're going with a team, like you're saying, if you've got a team and you're going, try as much as you can to cook and eat together if you've got the facilities. And it is really bonding, and I think in the chaos of it all, having a meal together can be really, really beneficial for team building and for everybody's mental health during the festival. Cooking and eating together is really good. I would also recommend trying to do things outside of the festival. especially if you're there for the whole month, going to the museum, the cinema, going on a path of sea or to the beach or doing something outside of it can be a really nice reset. Giving away free tickets, that's a tip if you're struggling in the first few days. Don't be worried about giving out some free tickets to get people to talk about your show. Try to know what you're going for. So going for the crack, it's just too expensive. It's just too expensive. If you want to go just for the fun of it, I would say, like, don't go. I was like, because it's just so expensive. Yeah. But if you know why you're going, whether it's I'm going to get exposure, or I'm going to book a tour, or I want to go and meet other artists or networks, or I want to get my show out there, just know what you're going for and make that your goal, and try not to get carried away in the currents of other things. Do scratch nights, do scratch events. That's really positive for getting bums on seats, but also you never know who's in the audience. In 2000, when we took Two Clowns One Cup in 2019, we did a random Femme Fringe scratch event where we did like a 5-minute snippet of Two Clowns One Cup, and there was a BBC journalist in the audience. Oh, wow. And that's how that then led to BBC doing a short documentary film about the making of Good Grief. So that's where that contact came from. So you never know who's in the audience if you do scratch events and things, and it's a good way to get people into your show. For flyering, I would say that lots of people are going paperless now. Often a paper flyer might just get put in the bin. There's lots of people that now they'll make a big poster board with a QR code and they get people to take a photo instead. I think actually having a photo in people's phones sometimes might be a little bit more powerful than a piece of paper that they might just throw to the bin. And I would also say for flyering, I think the best flyering technique, if your show has like a gimmick or a thing that you can do, that I've seen some like gimmicks that work really well for people, but I think more powerful than that is just being authentic and having genuine conversations with people, rather than feeling like you're just push a flyer into their hand and it's a fleeting moment. Try to get to know people and have conversations that involve everybody that you're talking to, and I think that's the best way to talk about your show and to get people to care, because flyering can be pretty soul draining. And I think if you have like 5 positive conversations over 30 fleeting moments, I think those 5 positive conversations are going to have more of an impact than 30 moments where you put a flyer in someone's hand. So that'd be my flyering tip.
Thank you so much. Yeah. You've given us some really good knowledge.
Sorry,
it's absolutely brilliant. You've given us so much to go on. Now, I do know that your shows, they're happening before the Edinburgh Fringe. Can you tell us where we can catch them?
Yes, so you can see Stuffed at the Unity Theatre on June the 20th. And you can also see it at Shakespeare North Playhouse on the 5th of July. And your ticket to Stuffed also includes a free pre-show meal, a post-show panel, and all performances are captioned and audio described as well.
Amazing.
Cool. God, the Devil and Me is touring, there's a list, Bath the 1st and 2nd of June at 4 p.m. at the Percy Centre. Right here at the Studio Below in Liverpool, 7th, 8th and 9th of June at, I believe it's, oh no, I'm going to get in trouble now. I believe it's at 7:30 p.m. Barnstaple, we are going to Barnstaple Fringe. If you go to Barnstaple Theatre Fest, all the information will be there because we get varied dates and times for what we're doing. Then we go to Bristol on the 13th and 14th of July, which is going to be at the Bristol Improv Theatre. And then we go to Edinburgh at the Space UK, 2nd to the 10th of August. And then we have Camden 16th to the 18th of August.
Wow. Amazing.
Yeah, I was like, wow.
It's a busy couple of weeks.
Yeah. I overbooked myself. I really regret it now.
Just to round off the podcast then, can you give us one selling point of your show and why it's going to the Fringe, why this show is going to the Fringe?
My selling point of Stuffed is that it is the the funniest and most furious show that you will probably see at the Fringe.
Okay. Fab.
A selling point for God, the Devil and Me. I guess similarly is that it's a really fun time. It's a really good time, but it's also got a lot of heart. And even if you know, you don't take away anything about Psychosis, it's about being a teenager, which we've all done. And I think it's a take on being a teenager if your best friends are God and the devil. And kind of take that away and see what you think of that, I guess. So yeah, that would be my selling point.
Amazing.
Thank you so much for joining our podcast. We've heard so many wonderful things and we're so excited to share this with everybody.
Thank you for
Thank
having
you for
us.
having us. Yeah, it's been great.
Fab, thank you.